So hello everyone, really excited to be here today. As Joe said, we're talking about community and collectives and all the good stuff that brings. And we really wanted to look at that sort of through two different lenses about making together and also playing together. And I just wanted to sort of start by maybe laying a little bit of a context to begin with through some expert quotes. Including first up my wonderful colleague Lynn Love, Dr. Lynn Love, the best possible name for a doctor of all time. Lynn recently completed her PhD. She's waiting to come in the door and hear her own words back at her. Lynn, I'm about to quote you. So very paraphrased, talking about playing together and the transformative power of play. And in Lynn's thesis, she says, in play, individuals form shared meanings, understanding and values. They become temporary communities who can experiment, explore and redefine their relationship with one another, the play context and potentially the world beyond. The experimental nature of play leads to transformative potential for everyone involved, whether that be in a small scale or on a larger scale. And I just thought that was a beautifully succinct way of thinking about how we play together and the real impact that can have. And we're also going to look at making together as well. I found a really nice quote from Will Wright where he says, "We're not just building a game experience, we're kind of building a community. The game is the catalyst of the activities that the community forms around." And I just want to take that as a sort of jumping off point for our discussion. So thinking about that as a sort of game, making games as the activity, as a catalyst for building communities. Coming to you first, Claire, is this something that you found in your experience? It sounds like it from the talk that you just gave. And I guess what's been some of the most memorable collective making experiences that you've had, whether through jams, and how has this influenced what you've made?
So I guess sort of talking about Bitsy again, for me, definitely, the more I used it, the more I the more I realised that there was loads and loads of other people making similar games, and it sort of gave me confidence in making, especially these sort of like personal games, I think, which I think before that I definitely kind of struggled to put that kind of personal stuff out there in that positive way. And I think a lot of it's down to the tool in particular, and because Bitsy and other tools like that aren't really designed to make sort of violent games or aggressive games. I mean, you could, but you'd have to try quite hard. So I think there's something about the limitations of that tool in particular that defines the sort of games that can be made through it. And so maybe that's why you get particular sort of communities forming around those sorts of tools. Yeah. Which is really nice, and I think it's just a really sharing and caring kind of community, which is lovely.
I guess in the context of being here at V&A Dundee, and I'm sure if you haven't had a chance to see Design, Play, Disrupt, you will soon. One of my favourite spaces is the Disruptors room, and particularly that Talking Heads wall. In that room, Chela Ramanam says, we need to be telling really interesting stories from all sorts of perspectives because art sits in the world, and if games are art, they need to reflect that world. So Kevin, we spoke a bit earlier about this, and I wonder if you can elaborate. How do you see the Games Workers Union in this role, and how do you guys help to advocate and support greater diversity in games?
A lot of it is just that, like, traditionally marginalized people, whether it be people of color or women or people of diverse genders, like in society as a whole and in the games industry as well, they sort of have a harder time, right? Their voices are oftentimes less heard. Like, there are lots of cool, diverse people making games, but there aren't a lot of cool, diverse people heading up game studios and deciding what games to make and what the like big direction of a game is. Which, if you take a look at Hollywood, that's a number of people doubting if movies like Black Panther or Captain Marvel or Into the Spider-Verse could ever be successful, because that's not our audience. Who would ever want to see a black superhero movie? Turns out a lot of people like to see a black superhero movie. So if like one of the like big things we're trying to do is to empower people who make games to decide what games they want to make, and like have a greater like creative freedom in like making however and whatever they want to make. And like traditionally, right, like games, like if you like think back all the way to people making games in Japan in the early era, you had Japanese developers just making a game and then putting it out there, and then they never know what's going to happen with it. Like the game might be super successful in the US and they'd never hear about it. They didn't even know that they made a successful game. Whereas today, like the community and connection between the people playing the games and the people making them is like way closer. Which also sadly means that a lot of like harassment and discrimination is like being directed at the people making games. We've seen stuff like Gamergate.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier that I thought would be interesting for the audience too about the real sort of control that that players have now, and the, I guess the power that they feel that they can exert over game studios and makers as well, and how that community has such a strong voice, towards the developers too.
Yeah. I think it's
not always in a good way.
Yeah, I think it's across media and like people demanding that the creators of Game of Thrones change the ending, or that the people just remake the whole Sonic movie from the ground up, and it's poor animators and Hollywood who need to redo all this stuff. But if you look at games, like a big thing last year was Jessica Price, who was a narrative designer working at ArenaNet on Guild Wars 2, which is a big MMO. And she was just on a private Twitter, not even like for the company, just sort of talking about the work she's doing and the problems like she's facing, like making a narrative for a game where you in the story you are the big singular hero, but then also everybody else is also the hero of their own story in this big MMO, and how to like deal with that from a like narrative perspective. And essentially like a big sort of, I think, influencer YouTuber or something in the Guild Wars community just stepped into like a private Twitter and said, "Oh, it's simple, you just do multiple choice." And she sort of said, "Look, I've been doing this for like 10 years and it's not that simple." And also, like, I didn't ask for your opinion on this. Like, why are you even here on my private Twitter? And then also a colleague of hers stepped in and said, she knows what she's doing, like, it's not that simple. And subsequently, both her and her colleague were fired by ArenaNet. And they said, oh, they went against the players, which is not okay. We at ArenaNet, we always respect the players' opinion, and we never ever, like, disagree with them, which is sort of just giving into the community sense of that they are entitled to shape the game. Which you see, I think Fortnite did an update where they changed something or the other, and Ninja and all the other big influencers were like, oh, we hate this. It's absolutely horrible, you immediately need to undo it. But what they did was they made the game more like accessible to new players and people who haven't played games before, which is not what Ninja and those kinds of people are. So they've made a change for like the majority of players, but you have the small vocal minority. It's like, no, this is horrible. And that's sort of like similar to how Gamergate works, in that the small amount of the community that is very vocal, that is coming into like private social media of developers, and sort of they are actually like blurring the line between like the professional like space in which you develop games and like your private life.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and I wonder if one of the ways to sort of push back against that, and one of the ways that we're seeing that, is by more sort of flat hierarchical collectives that are being developed to making games. And Darshana, I wonder if you can pick up on I guess what the research is telling us and some of the data that's out there about these kind of new collectives that are forming and what people are after, new systems.
Yeah, sure. So there's the main sort of research, one of them in this area is Africa. So she's kind of, I think like everyone remembers the like Office Space where Jennifer Aniston's character had to wear like 12 pieces of flair or something, otherwise she'd get fired. And that kind of like when play can or being forced to play can kind of become coercive as well. So diversity is kind of like a very nice buzzword, but you can't just hire people, you need to support them as well. So those kinds of like support structures are really important to make sure that they're kind of in place as well. Like people want guidance and skills to help them navigate new dilemmas. They have an appetite for more responsible leadership, and they want clear government regulation, which is I was surprised by, so they can innovate with awareness. So there's a lot of like, even at these kind of like major corporation levels, people are thinking about this kind of stuff, and like, what does it mean to form a community? You know, if you're making a game these days, you need to build an online community around it. And as Kevin was kind of saying, the relationship between the individual creative worker and that community can be really difficult to get right as well. So yeah, that's what the research is kind of saying.
Especially on that scale, I imagine as well, you know, to kind of, I think we're all doing what we can within our more localised communities, but how do we sort of amplify that? I know, Erin, you're Women in Games ambassador here in Dundee, and I wonder if, can you tell us a wee bit about how you got involved in that and what your motivation was for getting involved, especially in Dundee, you know, which is historically known as having feisty, strong women in its fabric. So it's brilliant, you know, that people like you are stepping up and being part of that. But how did you get involved in Women in Games?
Well, it was kind of by chance. It was a friend had invited me down to the conference, and it was like, oh, trip to London, nice one. And when we got there, you know, there's a lot of kind of important people speaking. You know, Anita Sarkeesian was there, and she kind of used this word of like, I used to be this kind of female chauvinistic pig, and I was just like, I relate to that. It was like, something needs to change there. And then they also used like the numbers, I think they said at the time, this was going back 2-3 years ago, I really hope it's changed, but only about 18% of the game industry in the UK was women, and that's the highest in Europe. And so like, that's kind of scary. And if we're wanting to make games for everyone, then everyone needs to be involved.
Making them.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And what kind of events have you been involved in then in the city over the last, well, how long have you been involved in it as ambassador for Dundee?
So it's been going about 1.5 years now.
Okay.
Over that time, I've done about 6 or 7 events. You know, most of those have been, there's been like a kind of costume jam that we did, just trying to make things together. But a lot of that has just been coffee mornings, and you know, everyone likes pastry, so everyone can come along. It's just about getting people together who might not normally see one another, and making everyone aware that, you know, there are other people that are having similar problems to you, or, you know, doing well, and just
a support system.
That's the word.
And then finding ways of, you know, then turning that into something that kind of where you can lift each other up and create opportunities for yourself. Darshana, I know you were at GDC earlier in the year, and we're talking about just ways to try and get those opportunities. It's not always easy. It's a real privilege to be able to go and do something like that. How did you kind of get yourself
Well, this is definitely something that kind of like maybe flies, because it's kind of an informal economy that is going on behind the scenes of everything as well. So it's like maybe 3 or 4 different little favours that added up to me being able to kind of take advantage of that, because a lot of technically inclined lecturers who are much better for Abertay to send to that particular conference. And it's only because I did, you know, all these different little things. So that kind of like, and by the way, Mel, great diversity on this panel right now. It's amazing. But you never know. I think like even if you're not in a position to give someone the job or give them the scholarship or whatever it is, like you never know how many kind of like things are humming along in the background that may get someone across the line. So it's why it's so important to have things like this, like these festivals, so that people can see different people participating in this space.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's becoming more and more evident within the community that you're building, Erin, is just all those little kind of ways of supporting each other can add up to bigger things and bigger opportunities for people. So, well done you. Just coming back to this sort of idea of collectives in that flat hierarchical structure, obviously Biome Collective, a great example of that here in Dundee. It feels like there's a sort of stronger desire for that kind of system going forward. but it's not always an easy thing to achieve, is it? I mean, who do you look to? Who's doing it well, and how are they doing it? You know, other collectives that you might be aware of.
What was the guys who made Dead
Motion
Cells?
Twin.
Motion Twin. Yeah, so they're in France.
Yeah.
They've been around since
Motion
Twin.
Twin.
They've been around since 2001, I think, so a long time.
Yeah.
And they made one of the most successful games, or as Kevin pointed out, the best game of 2018.
Depending on your
I haven't played that much of it, but you know, there are examples, and I think people are really looking for alternatives at the moment because they're asking ethical questions. They're asking, like, how do we fit into a community as a whole? Like, what are we doing with this technology?
Yeah. So Kevin, how does that work? You were talking about kind of the dynamic in that company, in that collective.
So, the Motion Twin is a worker-owned co-op, which means that everybody has an equal ownership in a company. They're all on an equal pay, and they have equal say. So it's like literally, you can't get any flatter than that. Like literally, everybody owns the company as an equal share. Everybody's the same pay, the same say. And of course, it doesn't mean that there aren't like social leaders and those kind of structures. Like, it doesn't mean that everybody is the boss in like how you'd think, in like a classical office sense. That does mean that there's a system in place that means that everybody's voice is being heard, right? And there are a couple of other co-ops. Like, the interesting thing with co-ops is, if you go away from developers, if you look into stuff like publishing, like what would a worker-owned co-op publisher look like that maybe doesn't focus as much on like being a publicly traded company as much on profits, but a publisher that focuses more on like creative ideas. And like, if you look at, I think this currently is a sale on the Epic Game Store, that Epic just dropped on developers. So a couple of developers are literally pulling their games off the Epic Store because the Epic Store decided to go on sale and didn't inform them. They're like, what is this? Why are you lowering the price of my game for me without telling me? So what would like a store platform look like that is owned by the developers? And there's all sorts of interesting, like, all the way from like making games to like how they are sold, how they're distributed. I think you can like build these sorts of communities that focuses more on making sure that everybody, like, they focus less on the pure capitalistic profit and more on like making sure that diverse voices and people are being heard and can like make a living making games.
Yeah,
Which
that's really important.
It's really important.
You have to contrast that kind of a model to, was it Blizzard Activision that kind of, they had one of the most profitable years ever, and they fired how many people? Like
800 people, 10% of
800.
their workforce. They also increased their shareholders' dividends by 10%. So you get 10% 2 times.
Wow.
So
The best incentives come with those kind of hierarchy.
Yeah, but no, Activision Blizzard, like, as a company, what you see is there were a couple of studies just in general about like companies that show that the Activision Blizzard CEO is one of the most overpaid CEOs. Not for games, not in America, just in general. Activision Blizzard, like, there was a study that shows that they pay negative 50% taxes. They get 50% of their taxes from the government. Right? They're the company that doesn't give back to like society or the developers. And that means that like the people making games are left on the side or even like fired, which, you know, in America, that's where healthcare is. That's where like the social security is.
Yeah, it's challenging times, but I think one of the ways to we need to start turning the tide, don't we? And so especially in a city like Dundee, where we have graduates in games, you know, hundreds by the year, it seems like a really hotbed place to start to try and turn the tide of that, and to try and model, you know, collectives that can, you know, be a bit more fair and a bit more considerate to how they treat their workers. Thinking about play then, you know, I mentioned earlier about, you know, Lynn's thesis looking at the sort of transformative nature of play, and how powerful that could be. I think everyone in the room is probably on board with the idea of the benefits of playing together for connecting and building friendships and creating communities. What are some of your most memorable sort of playful experiences, be that online, offline, as a child, video games? Let's end on a high after all that.
expected this panel to be really touchy-feely and happy, and it's like very political, so that's great.
It's to be that way. I think it's a sign of the times.
Yeah, I think but it's really important because, especially with technology, like the first thing you do when you get a new device is you have a play with it. Mm-hmm. So this kind of like the way that we're kind of designing is just incredibly important for, you know, as technology is spreading throughout society in so many new ways. I think, yeah.
I guess when it comes to like games experiences, for me, like the big thing is, on the Nintendo DS, it was enough if one person like bought a game and you could share it with, like, I think 8 other people or so. Mm-hmm. So you go on a school trip, one person has Mario Kart, and it just distributes like in the class. Everybody's just playing Mario Kart, right? And it's like that experience of like just one person has this game, and suddenly like it spreads like a virus on this like bus trip to somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then after the trip it's just gone because you don't own the game. It just there was this like temporary experience that you had.
Yeah. And then you moan at your mum for the next 6 months about getting a man.
You forgot the name of the game and you're like, shit, what was this game called? Oh no. Yeah, that's a lot of those school trips are pretty much that.
Good times, good memories. What about you, Em?
I don't know, like the thing I think of straight away is just like those big tents that you used to get, like when you did Girls' Brigade or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, even thinking to a couple months back where we did a bit of a board game night and like someone from HR was there, and it's like people from the actual game side of things had never talked to HR and they'd never spoke before, so it's like breaking down the barriers. And, you know, they're like, oh, I usually play Monopoly at the weekend, and it's like, oh no, don't do that.
Yeah, it's just so important, isn't it, for making those connections. And Claire, what would your memory be?
I guess a couple of things of recently. One,
you need this.
The V&A workshop that I mentioned briefly in my talk was really nice because it was a drop-in thing, so anyone that was sort of in the V&A on that week, because it was a whole week, could come in and join in. And so the idea was that we gave them like craft materials like tissue paper and cards and pipe cleaners, and then they built like an animal or a plant or a structure to add to this world. Mm-hmm. And because it went over the whole day, then by sort of the middle to the end of the day, people were sort of taking inspiration from all the other things that people had made that were already in the space. Mm-hmm. And also it was really nice because families sort of all created together. We weren't really sure how it was going to work and if it was just going to be the kids doing it, but I think the adults sort of...
We've got this intergenerational thing going on.
Yeah, and then you can see like people like were sort of like working with other groups that are there as well. Mm-hmm. So that was really lovely in terms of a sort of community collaborative vibe. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing has been... at some of the Feral Vector, the LARPs that they do there are just like incredible. So they run these sort of things where you just go out into the forest and there's a story that happens, and then people sort of just take on a character over time during the like hour or so that it happens, and just build this story together. And it was just like really silly, and I think that the silliness also makes people let their guard down a bit more and just really get into it and just have fun together. Mm-hmm. Which, they've been like highlights for me in the last few years, definitely.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I encourage you to think about the playful times that you have had and how wonderful those ones have been. I think we're probably out of time. Yes. Do we have time for questions? Or no? Are we doing that? Yeah. Any questions for our panel? We don't need to. Yeah.
With what you were talking about before, with the small community having a big voice, of the small gaming community, do you think that a lot of the back-end tracking and stuff now that games do will help with that? Because you're now seeing what those people that wouldn't talk actually like and actually do.
Yes and no. So here's... If you're thinking about free-to-play games where there's a very small minority of people actually investing money in the game, what it means is now that you can actively track, you know what your money spending minority is, and now you design for them, right? But also yes, you definitely could use that sort of tracking to just know what your average player how they actually experience the game. But if it is, if it's being used to find out how to monetize the best, then that's not how it's going to end up.
I think a lot of mobile games are designed with what they call whales in mind. There are people who spend way too much money on the game.
Yeah.
So that's something to be wary of, I think, using those technologies.
So it just becomes a different minority then.
Yeah. The amount of money.
Yeah.
Motivation. Yeah. Sorry.
So if I'm a video games industry worker, how could I get involved in a trade union, and why should I do that?
I mean, the easiest way to get involved in the union is to join it. It's true, like a union, at least I think of it, it's not like a third party, like, there are like big bureaucratic sort of unions that you just join and they send you a flyer every now and then for insurance or whatever. Well, what we want to be is like, it's a community of game developers that stand together to like improve their rights. And protect each other and care about each other and like how they're making games and what their problems are. So if the easiest way is like to join. I don't want to like plug
He's
it in.
got his jumper on, so he's definitely
I've got my jumper
already
on. It's like around $10 a month. Like recently, there was this big Delta anti-union propaganda poster on their planes that read like, why would you join a union if you could buy a console instead? Which Delta, a different story. But the easiest way to like be active in GameWorks Night as a union is to join it, and then. But the other important step is to speak to their coworkers, like figure like especially the ones you don't usually speak to, like try to figure out what are their problems, their concerns, like what do they enjoy about the workplace, what would they like to change. And like there are like issues that, because like I'm not a parent, so like paternity or maternity leave is not on my mind like as much, but I speak to my coworkers and like they want to buy a house, get a mortgage, and those are sorts of problems they're facing in with the way the industry works, that like I can now like help improve that, but I only know about those problems and those perspectives because I need to talk with the people I work with, right, and get to know them and their problems.
Yeah. Having that awareness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.